Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to talk about how AI, or more particularly natural language processing, can be used for analyzing emotions. And I'm going to start with what is natural language processing, just to make sure that we're on the same page. So it's basically processing, analyzing, and producing human language, most commonly text, but also other types of language data. And I see it as this interdisciplinary field that borrows from neighboring fields, including AI and informatics, information retrieval, linguistics, and psychology. And when we analyze language, we can do it on a word level, or a sentence or phrase level, or a meaning level. And when we're looking at emotions, we're doing meaning level analysis, and the psychology is particularly important for that. So what is emotion analysis? How many of you have heard of sentiment analysis? Just a quick poll. OK, great. So you know approximately what I'm talking about. The reason I'm making a distinction between sentiment and emotion is that sentiment analysis looks at opinion, attitude, and emotions. And I'm focusing particularly on the emotion part of this. And we can look at emotions in various kinds of ways. And the most common way of analyzing them is looking at polarity, i.e. whether something's positive or negative, or possibly neutral. But we can also take a more fine-grained look into it, and we can look at distinct state emotions. Now, there are several ways of categorizing emotions, and this is something that the psychology of emotions has discussed over decades. The most common ones that you'll find in almost every system are going to be some sort of positive emotion, then there's going to be anger, sadness, and fear, and then potentially some other emotions depending on what you're analyzing, what you're focusing on in particular, and what the tools enable. And initially, emotion analysis has been done so that there's a human annotator that takes a huge bunch of text data, goes through it manually, and labels every sentence or unit of text with an emotion. And that's a lot of work. So gratefully, we've gotten some automated ways of doing this. And initially, lexicons were used. And lexicons are basically dictionaries that contain emotion words that help us detect those emotion words in the text and rate some sort of emotion score for the unit of text. Now we can do it with machine learning, which is a little bit more accurate on average. And it's particularly good when you have some sort of text where there's a lot of domain-specific vocabulary, or it's, for instance, in a language that doesn't have a lot of lexical resources. And we can also combine the approaches by using the lexicons to help us do feature engineering for a machine learning algorithm. And those have some really promising results. Emotions can be looked at as the primary interest of the analysis, like if we want to look at the emotional climate in some sort of online community, like let's say Finland before the parliamentary election. What are the big emotions that are there? Are they related to some particular topics or parties and so forth? Or we can look at them as a tool to help us with other types of analyses, like we want to detect fake news. We can't detect fake news based on emotion scores alone, but we can use it as one of the features in combination with others, and it's found to be helpful for that. The data sources used in emotion analysis are typically, you can do it basically virtually any language set is fine, but it's typically going to be crowd-created, online, digital traces. And the most common one that's used in different kinds of analyses, both in the business and the research world, are going to be social media posts, online reviews, and blogs. And you can analyze all kinds of different things with this. But the big thing that everybody's doing, and there's a lot of commercial service providers, is electronic word of mouth, which basically means that you look online in different kinds of sources, what is being said about a certain brand or a company or maybe a campaign, and then you look at how people are reacting to that brand or campaign or company. What are they saying? How are they feeling about it? And how does that information propagate in online networks? And there's no reason why we would have to limit this to text. We can also do it for videos or audio. There are also data sources that are less public than social media. Data sources data that typically a company would accumulate internally, like service requests or feedback from customers. And you can also do this for audio, and a lot of the audio sources would be private in nature. They'd be virtual assistants making recordings so that they can develop the service to be better. It could be phone calls to a customer service line. And what you could do with analyzing the emotions in these types of data is that you could pinpoint where the customers are particularly frustrated or particularly dissatisfied, and then prioritize addressing these issues. And I'm going to go through 2 examples, because I don't have time for more. I'd love to talk about this forever. Electronic word of mouth, I picked this as an example because this is something that's been done a lot. And this is important because information and emotions propagate rapidly online. Like if somebody tweets that this and this company did a really bad thing, it's going to spread like wildfire. And so being able to monitor social media streams for these kinds of conversations or these kinds of buzzes will allow us to find out what's going on in time to react to it. And I've picked 3 concrete cases, 2 of which are probably familiar to people here. United Airlines and Delta Airlines being the first one. A couple of years ago, they were both in headlines a lot for having mistreated customers, and then video got out, and then it got ugly. And in particular, United Airlines got a lot of criticism for addressing the problem too late and not addressing it appropriately. So if they'd caught it earlier on, maybe they could have changed that. And now, obviously, it's not enough to just spot it. You also have to have a decent communication strategy. But spotting it is the first step here. I took Pepsi's protest ad as a second example, a more positive one. I don't know if you remember the Pepsi ad where there was a demonstration and there was Kendall Jenner handing a Pepsi can to one of the riot policemen and diffusing the tension in the situation there. And this was considered tone deaf to the Black Lives Matter struggle. And Pepsi caught this on time, withdrew the ad quite quickly, and issued a statement taking responsibility of it. And later on, it was estimated that they saved a lot of reputation damage by being really quick to react and by reacting in a way that de-escalated. So these are examples of like how it can go if you catch it quickly and you do something, or if you don't. The third example, I'm fairly sure no one's going to know about this, because this is a small hotel in Copenhagen. And they made the unfortunate decision to host a Swedish far-right political group after several hotels had refused them. And this got public, and there were lots of protests, and some of the protesters went online to show their disapproval. Copenhagen Park Inn didn't have a strategy. They didn't know how wide this was. If they commented something, and mostly they didn't, they'd mainly comment that, oh, we're not interested in politics. And that provoked the protesters further to go to Trustpilot and Facebook and lots of other places where you can leave online reviews. And they left scathing 1-star reviews. And for a company that had 200 reviews to begin with on Trustpilot, having 100 1-star reviews is going to have consequences that are fairly severe for the average ratings for quite a long time, because they accumulate slowly. So this example is here just to show that it's not just big businesses or big corporations that need to care about this kind of stuff, but it also applies to small businesses, and maybe even more so. My second example is about how to find relevant information in crisis situations. And this is less of a business, but more of a sort of societal impact example. And social media is used in different kinds of disaster situations a lot for finding information. And disaster situations could be anything from natural disasters to terror attacks or riots or accidents like Fukushima. And it's used by emergency responders, but it's also used by authorities and private people, both on-site or in the affected area, and people who are farther away, but somebody they care about is in the affected area, or the information is relevant to them somehow. And the problem with this is that there is a huge volume of data surrounding these types of events. And finding the relevant information quickly enough is a huge challenge. And I took, just to sort of exemplify it, I took a handful of tweets from Hurricane Sandy. And most of the volume is going to be things like people are offering thoughts and prayers or condolences or expressing their worries. Or it could be self-disclosing, like, oh, I'm so happy school is closed. Or it could be joking about the event, like in the case of Hurricane Sandy. And then there's some tweets that contain information that's relevant for people who, for instance, try to chart where the flood has progressed and how bad the situation is. And so what we want to do is we want to find these tweets and discard all the others. The best way to do this would be based on geolocation, because typically the tweets from the affected area are going to be the ones that are informative, and they're going to be the ones that are most trustworthy. But like a small proportion of tweeters actually use geolocation or have enabled that. And it's something that's by default off. So you have to specifically tell Twitter to disclose the geolocation information, otherwise it won't do it. So if we use that as a single criterion, we're going to only have like a small fraction of the tweets that we actually wanted to find. So how do we solve this? Turns out the tweets from the affected area have certain characteristics regarding emotions and topics that are a little bit different than tweets farther away. And if we can map the emotions and topics in the data, we can discard and exclude a lot of the chatter that's irrelevant to us. We can sort of approximate geolocation based on emotion and topic features. And this allows us to really filter huge quantities of the data away. It depends on the situation how much. It depends on the data. But you're going to get a much shorter list that's then easier to go through to find the information that you need in order to be able to react the right way in a situation where time is super crucial. And as with every approach, there are some challenges. The first challenge is that language is imprecise, it's irregular, and it's ambiguous. And this is especially true to online resources. Like, if I go on Facebook, I'll probably not be very formal. There are lots of people who use English as a second language. There's lots of abbreviations, lots of online slang. And this makes it harder to parse it correctly. But even if people use perfectly correct language, sometimes you need context in order to understand what something means. Like if I say, I made her duck. Did I create a bird that somebody owns? Did I make her force her to crouch? Or did I prepare a dish for her? You won't know if you don't have the context. So language is tricky. Also, emotions are tricky. They're difficult to categorize, and they're difficult to quantify. So if I pick a random tweet from, for instance, the examples on the previous slide, and I give it to 3 people, and I'm like, rate the positivity of this tweet on a scale of 1 to 5. It's not unlikely that I'm going to get 3 different answers. So this is not a precise science. And that's just a limitation we have to accept. Because if humans can't categorize emotions exactly and precisely, how can we expect a computer to? Third challenge, as with every AI solution, the outcome depends on the data. If the data doesn't contain emotions, we can't really say much based on them. If the data is not representative, we might not get results that are meaningful. Also, human participation is inevitable when we're analyzing emotions, both in the training phase and the evaluation phase. And I wanted to add privacy concerns here because of the type of data we're dealing with. When we're dealing with trace data that's crowd-created, the crowd is going to mind if we use the data in a way that they feel infringes on their privacy. Even if they've clicked accept on a terms of use agreement that says that this data may be used for developing the service further, if it's not clearly stated that the analysis might be done by a human being who will see or hear your personal data, that might become a problem, and that's going to lose a lot of trust really quickly. So I think it's important to remember that when we're analyzing trace data that is created by private individuals, we need to be very clear about what kind of analysis is going to be done, how to opt out, and is the analysis going to be done by a human or a computer. So, now that I've spooked you with the challenges, let's talk about the opportunities. I think one of the most fascinating things about this is that we can really try to understand collective emotional phenomena. And this can range from anything like trying to understand emotional climates or emotional temperatures in certain situations in society to trying to understand how we reason about decision-making. And I think decision-making is really interesting. Emotions drive that a lot. We're not really fully aware of that, but it's everywhere. Emotions affect how much or what kind of information we share, how we vote, what we buy, what we find trustworthy, with whom we connect. It's all there. And if we ignore this component of decision making, I think we're missing out on a lot of information. And so this gives us the ability to, for instance, monitor customer satisfaction and public sentiment. And this is done a lot, but I don't think we're doing it well enough. Like, for instance, I think a lot of the time going beyond polarity and looking at the distinct state emotions is going to provide us with better information than just looking at positive versus negative. So that's all, folks. If you have any questions, please come ask, especially if you ask about the information sharing in disaster situations. You might get a really enthusiastic monologue. I'm just warning you. Thank you.